Everyone wants to know the same thing right now. Is the war with Iran coming back, or is it truly over? Are the negotiations going to hold, or are they going to collapse into something far worse than what we witnessed before? For the past week, analysts, governments, and intelligence services across the globe have been trying to answer that singular pressing question. The answer came not from a diplomatic cable or a leaked memo, but from a press conference podium where a leader stood laughing. He was standing alongside the Argentine president, making a joke about how every time his guest visits the region, something consequential happens. A big event, as he put it. The room of officials and journalists laughed along with him, but the meaning beneath the smile was not ambiguous at all. He was telling anyone paying close enough attention that he fully expects the war to resume. It was not framed as a mere speculation, but as a prediction from someone who has been inside every strategic decision of this conflict from the very beginning. That was the first answer, a signal wrapped in a punchline. Here is the second answer, and it is far more detailed and sobering. A major newspaper of record just published the most comprehensive military analysis, yet explaining why the most powerful navy in human history spent 39 days fighting Iran and still could not permanently open the Strait of Hormuz. The explanation involves a fleet of small boats, thousands of them, operating in a way that no aircraft carrier or destroyer can easily counter. Once you understand exactly how that fleet works and where it hides, you will understand why this war, whether it restarts tomorrow or next month, is going to be fundamentally different the second time around. The entire strategic balance of the Persian Gulf has been altered, and the first phase of the conflict was merely a preview of a much more complex and dangerous confrontation. The diplomatic track that was supposed to prevent this second phase is currently hanging by a thread in a place that rarely finds itself at the center of global attention. Pakistan does not do things quietly when it prepares for something significant, and in the days leading up to the latest round of diplomatic contacts, strange things began happening at the most fortified civilian accommodation in the entire country. This hotel is surrounded by blast walls, controlled entry points, and layered security that rivals some military bases. Yet hotel management began quietly and politely asking guests to check out and find alternative lodging. The reason was not an emergency or a security threat to the building itself. The reason was that delegations were coming. American and Iranian delegations were both headed to the same building, in a country that shares a volatile border with Iran and has historically maintained essential back-channel relationships with Washington. Pakistan's willingness to host these talks in the heart of Islamabad is not accidental. The country's leadership has invested enormous political capital in positioning the nation as the one entity trusted enough by both sides to serve as an honest broker. That positioning appeared to pay off handsomely when both Washington and Tehran acknowledged Pakistan's role as instrumental in brokering the 2-week ceasefire that paused the first phase of the war. The optimism inside the capital was genuine. Pakistani officials told international media that a breakthrough was within reach. Statements from the American side hinted that a deal could come within days, and there was even whispered chatter about a potential personal visit to Islamabad if an agreement was signed. For approximately 72 hours, the diplomatic atmosphere was the most positive it had been since the first American strikes hit Iranian territory in late winter. Then a tanker tried to run the blockade, and everything changed. The vessel was called the Tuscarora. It was part of what the Treasury Department describes as Iran's shadow fleet, a collection of aging, sanctions-evading tankers used to smuggle Iranian crude oil to buyers willing to circumvent international restrictions. The Tuscarora left the Strait of Hormuz on a course that took it directly into the American Navy's blockade perimeter. Naval commanders knew immediately what they were watching. The ship knew the blockade was there. Everyone knew. American vessels broadcast warnings over maritime radio for 6 hours, not 6 minutes, but 6 continuous hours of hailing, asking the Tuscarora to turn around and return through the strait. The ship's crew did something telling. They shut off their communications equipment entirely. They did not change course. They did not slow down. They maintained speed and heading as if the warnings were not being transmitted at all. After 6 hours of being ignored, the Navy opened fire on the vessel's engine room, disabling it. A boarding party seized the ship. The response from Washington came within hours, confirming that the vessel was subject to prior sanctions due to its history of illegal activity and that American forces now controlled it. Oil markets reacted with immediate, sharp volatility. Crude prices jumped approximately 6% in a single afternoon. That kind of single-session move in energy markets is not routine. It is the market pricing in a specific probability that the ceasefire is ending, and that the flow of energy is about to be disrupted again. The reason the 6-hour warning window matters so much is not just procedural. It reflects something deeper about the current state of intentions. The Navy was aware that boarding and seizing an Iranian-linked vessel on the very same day new diplomatic contacts were being organized in Islamabad was a provocation with direct consequences for the talks. They gave every possible opportunity to avoid the confrontation. The tanker chose the confrontation anyway, and that choice came from somewhere. It came either from commanders testing American resolve to see if the blockade was still serious, or from commanders who have already decided internally that the talks are not going to produce anything worth preserving. Meanwhile, Iran's chief diplomat delivered his assessment of American intentions directly to Pakistan's leadership on the same day. According to reports, he told Pakistani officials that the Americans had reopened the strait on their own terms while maintaining a naval blockade of Iranian ports, and that this was not the behavior of a party acting in good faith. The gap between what the American side says is on offer and what Iran says it is willing to accept is enormous. The terms of the American proposal, which have been partially confirmed through leaks and reporting from arms control organizations and major newspapers, are extensive. The multi-point proposal transmitted to Iran via Pakistani intermediaries includes a permanent end to uranium enrichment on Iranian soil, the removal of Iran's existing stockpile of highly enriched uranium, reportedly around 450 kilograms, out of the country entirely, a significant reduction in Iran's ballistic missile program, a suspension of financial and material support to militia groups across the Middle East, and the permanent reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. In exchange, the United States would release approximately $27 billion in frozen Iranian financial assets, all at once and not on a phased schedule. Sanctions would then be progressively lifted as Iran demonstrates compliance with each condition. The American leader described these terms publicly and even claimed that Iran had agreed to hand over enriched uranium buried under the rubble of its bombed nuclear facilities, a claim Iran did not confirm and did not deny quickly enough to stop the statement from circulating globally. Iranian officials have rejected this framework outright, calling it a recycled version of previous maximalist demands. The Iranian parliament speaker listed 7 specific factual claims made by the American side that he characterized as false. An Iranian professor summarized Tehran's position by stating that Iran wants an all-inclusive deal that addresses the American military presence in the region, the situation in Gaza, sanctions relief, and regional security, or no deal at all. A narrow nuclear agreement that leaves everything else on the table is not something Iran considers worth signing. That is not a negotiating position. That is a description of two parties who do not yet share the same definition of what a deal even means. And while that definition gap exists, the Mosquito Fleet is the instrument that keeps Iran at the table on its own terms. Most people know Iran has a navy. Almost nobody outside military analysis circles knows Iran has 2 navies, and that the second one is the specific reason the United States has struggled to open the strait. When the revolution came to power in 1979, the new leadership understood something about institutional loyalty that most revolutionary leaders overlook. The conventional Iranian military, which had been built and equipped largely by the United States under the previous regime, was not reliably loyal to the new Islamic Republic. There was a pressing need for a military force whose loyalty was absolute, personal, and ideological. Thus, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was created, and in 1986, a naval branch was created specifically for this Guard Corps, entirely separate from Iran's conventional navy. This new naval force did not start with warships. It started with speedboats, small, fast, highly maneuverable launches that could be crewed by a handful of soldiers and sent into the Persian Gulf independently of any larger fleet structure. The theory was straightforward. In a waterway as narrow and geographically complex as the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, small, fast boats operating in large numbers could interdict, harass, and threaten commercial shipping in ways that even a technologically superior adversary would struggle to respond to efficiently. The strategy was tested and validated in the 1980s during the Tanker War, a period when Iranian forces attacked commercial vessels carrying Iraqi oil. It was validated again more recently when patrol boats stopped, boarded, filmed, and briefly detained an American Navy crew whose vessels had drifted into Iranian-claimed waters. That incident, involving 10 sailors photographed kneeling with their hands behind their heads, broadcast across Iranian state media, became a recruitment and propaganda milestone. It demonstrated beyond any internal doubt that the small boat doctrine worked against the most powerful navy in the world. After that moment, Iran invested heavily in the program. The speedboats became purpose-built combat vessels, manufactured domestically, designed to carry torpedoes, anti-ship missiles, and drone launching systems. Production scaled up significantly. The fleet grew from hundreds to thousands of vessels, and the doctrine evolved from harassment to what analysts now describe as swarm warfare. This involves overwhelming a larger adversary with simultaneous coordinated attacks from multiple directions at speeds and angles that make conventional naval defense extremely difficult to execute. This is the Mosquito Fleet, and it is what the recent analysis identified as the primary reason the United States, after 39 days of combat operations, still cannot reliably keep the Strait of Hormuz open for commercial shipping. The Mosquito Fleet is not difficult to defeat because the boats themselves are technologically impressive. A single American destroyer could sink dozens of them in open water. The challenge is finding them, and that is where Iran's geography becomes its most powerful weapon. The naval force operates from 10 underground bases distributed along Iran's coastline and across the islands that ring the Strait of Hormuz. These are not surface installations that can be identified in satellite imagery and struck from altitude. They are carved directly into rock, tunnel systems that open onto the water at sea level, allowing boats to emerge from below ground, execute operations, and return to cover within minutes. The analysis described the infrastructure specifically. Vessels docked along piers within deep caves excavated along the rocky coastline, ready to be deployed in minutes. The caves are deep enough that conventional aerial surveillance cannot identify individual boats from orbit. Strike aircraft targeting the tunnel openings face the reality that destroying the entrance does not destroy the boats inside, and that Iran has had decades to build secondary exits. The 10 islands that ring the strait serve as distributed forward operating bases. Each island has its own tunnel network, its own boat contingent, and its own weapon storage. Attacking one base does not degrade the capability of the others. To eliminate the Mosquito Fleet from a strategic perspective, the United States would need to destroy all 10 simultaneously, a coordinated strike package that would require precise intelligence on interior layouts that American forces do not fully possess. The military, to its credit, has been honest about the partial results of its campaign. Commanders have publicly acknowledged that approximately half of the fast attack boats have been destroyed or disabled during the 39-day conflict. Half is a significant achievement. It is also a testament to how many there were to begin with, that destroying half of them was not sufficient to reopen the strait. Iran's asymmetric logic is almost poetic in its simplicity. The naval force uses the cheapest weapons that cause the most expensive disruption. A speedboat worth tens of thousands of dollars, armed with a missile worth a few $100,000, can close a waterway through which 20% of the world's oil supply normally flows. The economic cost ratio between the attacker and the defender in that equation is entirely in Iran's favor. But Iran's calculation may be about to face a different kind of challenge because the United States has repositioned its most powerful assets, and this time they are not configured for another 39 days of the same kind of war. The most advanced aircraft carrier ever built crossed the Suez Canal during the ceasefire window and repositioned to the Red Sea. Another carrier strike group was already operating in the Arabian Sea when the ceasefire began, and it has not left. A third carrier is now approaching the Persian Gulf from the eastern Mediterranean. 3 carrier strike groups simultaneously in the same operational theater. This is not routine naval deployment. A single carrier strike group consisting of 1 carrier, 3 destroyers, a supply ship, and a nuclear submarine represents more concentrated firepower than most countries possess in their entire military. 3 operating in coordination represents a level of force projection that has not been deployed in this region since the opening days of the Iraq War more than 2 decades ago. Correspondents speaking directly with the American leader during the ceasefire reported stark warnings. If Iran does not sign the deal, the United States will level every bridge, every power plant, and every piece of critical infrastructure in the country. The message was that America's weapons and military equipment are now in a significantly better position than when the first phase of operations began, and that the ceasefire has been used on the American side not to rest, but to rearm, reposition, and prepare a qualitatively different campaign. The language used, a fair deal or what comes next, was not rhetorical. The carrier positioning confirms it operationally. What comes next likely means, based on the repositioned assets and the analysis coming out of military think tanks, is not a continuation of the first campaign's airstrike model. It is a ground and amphibious component, operations designed to physically occupy and destroy the tunnel infrastructure from the inside, rather than attempting to strike it from the air. That is the only military solution to the Mosquito Fleet problem that analysts have consistently identified as potentially decisive. It is also the most dangerous escalation available because Iranian ground forces defending home territory, particularly Guard Corps units with absolute ideological loyalty, would present a threat of a different magnitude than the anti-aircraft defenses America spent 39 days dismantling. A ground component would also almost certainly trigger Iranian attempts to project force into neighboring Gulf states, and that changes the entire regional map. Right now, in real time, the clearest thing that can be said about the diplomatic situation is this: nobody, not analysts, not governments, not the negotiators themselves, knows with certainty what is happening inside the room. The American side says Iran has agreed to hand over its enriched uranium. Iran has not confirmed this. The American side says the Strait of Hormuz is permanently open. The Guard Corps fired on tankers last week. The American side says a deal is days away. Iranian state media announced that Tehran has no current plans to participate in new talks. A newspaper with reliably consistent sourcing inside intelligence assessments reported that Tehran has shown genuine flexibility on 3 of the most contested points: the physical removal of enriched uranium stockpiles from Iranian territory, modifications to the ballistic missile program, and a reduction in support for external militia groups. The remaining sticking points, according to that reporting, are the duration of the uranium enrichment suspension and a handful of implementation details. That is a very different picture than the one Iranian officials are publicly describing, and the gap between the two pictures is where wars get restarted. There are currently only a few people who know the actual state of these negotiations: the Pakistani intermediaries who are physically in the room, whoever is speaking for Iran's actual decision-making authority, and the American leader. Everyone else, every analyst, every television correspondent, every government that is not Pakistan, is reading signals and making inferences. The signals are contradictory. The tanker seizure signals confrontation. The hotel clearance in Islamabad signals negotiation. The firing on commercial ships signals defiance. The reporting on Iranian flexibility signals possible compromise. These things cannot all be simultaneously true in the same direction, which means one of two things is happening. Either the two sides are genuinely closer than their public rhetoric suggests, and the contradictory signals are tactical noise from parties that do not want to appear weak going into a final agreement, or the negotiations have already broken down internally, and the public signals of progress are diplomatic theater designed to allow both sides to claim they tried before the shooting restarts. The Mosquito Fleet will not disappear from this story, even if a deal is reached in Islamabad this week. Even if Iran signs every point, and the frozen assets are released and the uranium is shipped out, the naval force and its underground infrastructure will still exist. The 10 island bases will still be operational. The tunnel networks will still be intact. The doctrine will still be intact, and any future administration in Tehran, under any future pressure, will still have the option of deploying that fleet the moment it decides the terms of any agreement are no longer acceptable. The recent military analysis of the Mosquito Fleet is the most important piece of journalism to come out of this conflict, not because it reveals secrets, but because it explains why the world's most powerful conventional military force spent nearly 6 weeks in combat and ended with a stalemate. The answer is not a failure of American capability. It is a success of Iranian strategic planning that began in 1986 and has been quietly, consistently developed for 4 decades. If the war returns, and the laughter at that press conference suggested it might, the United States will enter that second phase with 3 carrier strike groups, significantly improved weapons positioning, and a different operational concept designed to address the specific problem the Mosquito Fleet created. Whether that different concept works is the question this conflict will eventually answer. For now, hotel rooms are being cleared. Victories are being claimed on terms that haven't been confirmed, and somewhere in a tunnel beneath a Persian Gulf island, a fast attack boat with a missile on its deck is sitting in the dark, waiting to find out which version of events is true.